Hi everyone, and welcome back to the Communicate Clever, where we decode human stories behind extraordinary journeys. Today's episode is very close to my heart. It's part of our Doctor Diary series. We are stepping into the hallways of one of the most prestigious medical institutions in India, AIMS, through the eyes of someone living it every day. Joining me is Dr. Devina, a compassionate young doctor with not just a stethoscope but a story. Let's dive into the human side of medicine at AIMS. Hi, Dr. Devina. Welcome to the show. Pleasure's all mine. Okay, so let's rewind to the beginning first. When did you first know you wanted to become a doctor and you told your parents?
Other classical household in India, nobody really, I didn't tell anybody. Actually, people told me. So that is like, it's been a while now. My parents were always like, she's our daughter and she's going to become a doctor. Since I was a kid, it was always there. And then I think it struck me around maybe when I was in class 9th or 10th that okay, I think I really might just do this because I was liking the things. I was looking around the doctors in my family. So I do have a few doctors in my own family, although my parents are both lawyers. So that's how it began. But yeah, gradually, when it came down to picking up a branch, like we have to pick up in mathematics and biology in class 11. So at that point, I was pretty much clear about it, and I think that is where it began.
Okay, that's such a powerful topic and such early clarity, I would say. And now AIMS is a dream for lakhs. Tell us about your journey getting in. And honestly, what challenges did you face during your NEET preparation?
So, NEET, as you know, and as I think most of the listeners might be well aware of, is one of the toughest exams to clear in the country at present. Right, lakhs of students are appearing for the exam, and there is a lot of questions about it. Until now, like I am through almost 10 plus years now. I gave my attempt in 2013, and it's already 2025 now. So it's been a while, yes, but back then as well, it was a damn competitive exam, and it began with preparation right from class 11th. And so these days, I think children are preparing straight up from class 6th or 7th even. But back then, I started preparing very honestly from 11th itself, and I joined a coaching, and then things went along, and then yes, boards as well. So all this happened, and I think the first biggest bump that I got in my journey was probably right after class 12th, when I was okay about the exam. I had multiple options in my head. I was still a kid, right? So I didn't have the clarity. So that's when it began. And the biggest bump I faced was in 2014 when I gave my attempt, and I was just one mark close. And I got into BDS, which is the dental counterpart of MBBS, that is the dental part of medicine. And I got college, but it's Banaras Hindu University, which is one of the best central colleges in the country. Yeah. But that is where I had to take a decision for myself, because my parents were really okay with it. They were in fact happy, they were celebrating, and everybody at my home was congratulating me actually. But there's a point when you know that okay, I am big enough to take a decision. And I think I was just 20, less than 20 years old, yeah. That's how. And then I was like, all of a sudden, I just took away my documents, and I'm like, okay, no, I am going to study for another 6-7 months, whatever it takes, and let's give it one proper shot. So I just want to tell this to everybody who's listening to me today that there is no perfect shot, but if you think that you can do better, please do give it a shot, because sometimes we just don't know what we are really destined for, and what we can really really achieve. Of course, I never thought at that cross section that I can ever be a part of an institution as huge as AIMS. At that point my simple dream was just to get into a decent medical college and do MBBS. and go from there. So parents are lawyers, so there is no direct guidance from family end as well. So at that point, I was just all on my own. I took away my documents. I started preparing again. Met a few of my really, really amazing teachers: biology, physics, and chemistry. All three of them, and it went smoothly. And by God's grace, in the next 7 months, we had the next exam, and I got through. So that is how neat was for me. Really, it was basically taking my documents away from a very precious institute after getting in, and then just taking it away and then going from there. So yeah, that's how it began.
That kind of perseverance. It's something most people don't see behind the rank. How did you stay focused through those ups and downs? And I love that managing the journey that in bit-sized pieces. What about communication during that time? Did your conversations with your mentors, your peers impact your mindset?
Of course, it did. I mean, so even today, I'm very much in touch with most of my faculties and teachers who had taught me biology, physics, and chemistry, all three of them. And I used to speak with them, discuss, ask questions. There was always doubts in my mind, and especially it's like when you leave a seat and then you start preparing for something in particular, there's always that added pressure. So you want to cope with it, and you want to really speak out, because you can't just keep on piling it up inside you, and you can't just expect yourself to kind of deal with all of it all on your own. So, and at that point in time, I think looking back, I was pretty mature to deal with all of it. And NEET UG, relatively, I mean, it just went on. And then the past years, the mock tests, I still remember all of it very vividly. In fact, my school is also having an alumni meet very soon in the next month.
Colleges, yeah.
So they've called me as a speaker, and the faculty teachers still do talk to me about how to tell the students and how to go about it. So I think it's about perseverance. It's about I think people say it rightly, we somehow understate it, but you really need to kind of cut yourself out from the world for a few months, of course, and put your head and heart into it, and then I think nothing is really difficult. So yeah.
So fast forward to your first week at Ames. What was like that? And any memories that still stays with you?
Okay, so AIMS again. So there is this two exams called NEET UG, and then we have the NEET PG, which is the ultimate. Like I said, I had been really, mature probably 10 years back, but 4 years back from now, I'm not sure, because NEET PG was a real, like a big rock in my life. And then it was, I had to kind of juggle through it. So I finished with my internship and my MBBS and everything. And I was pretty sure about what I wanted from life in general. Right. I knew the things I wanted. Initially, I was very inclined towards surgery and then going for onco surgery as a super specialty. I was really inclined towards that. But then when I gradually kept on preparing, I realized that, okay, maybe the cutting part, not so much. So, gradually this thought came into my head, okay, let's experiment a little, let's do something new, let's create something that really goes on for a few generations now. So that's how I think it began. And then of course there were a lot of hurdles. I'll kind of be very frank with you. There were real problems. So it began with, again, me getting a branch of ophthalmics in my own home college, which is a very lucrative option because it's comfortable, and ophthalmics, that is basically eye specialty, specializing in eye, right? So that is a lucrative option. The scope is huge, and the college is amazing, and everything, right? So, leaving out on a government PG seat and then sitting down to prepare yet again for another year, and then all that COVID struggle began. So, I mean, it was a task, and then obviously because of COVID, the exam kept on getting delayed and postponed and everything. So mentally, I think it was much more taxing compared to NEET UG for me, and there was a lot of hurdles in between all of this, and then there's always that question because you've left one branch and now you want to get into something better. You want to do better with your life. You want to achieve something. And by this time, I was really very sure about what I wanted, and I knew I needed some quality in my life for once. And is when a final breakthrough, and with God's grace, again, it came in the form of a decent AIMS rank. And I had quite a few options even this time. But picking up this particular branch again, it was the third speed breaker for me, because people don't really know about this branch. It is a relatively new branch, and however impactful new branches, you need to kind of explain it to people what you're really doing, what kind of patients you're dealing with, and how things are. You have to explain yourself to everybody. I mean, I had to explain it to everyone in my own family first. This
Mhm.
branch cancer patients, and it is dealing with pain, it is dealing with supportive care, which is a very new and a foreign concept in India. So in foreign, it is already a well established super specialty branch, but in India it is relatively a very new and upcoming thing, concept, only in the higher colleges, only in the topmost tier colleges. So that makes it very challenging, even to pick it up in the first place. So pursuing it is okay, another task altogether. But picking it up was a challenge, definitely. And at that cross section also, there was always, this option that okay, you can just pick up some branch which is relatively known to, like obstetrics and gynecology. Everybody knows what a gynecologist
Mhm.
is, right? But
Yeah.
nobody really knows what a palliative medicine person is. So, yeah, I think that's how the NEET PG and the INI CET PG struggle was. But then I think the moment I landed here in AIMS, I knew where this is who I wanted to be, and I knew to be impactful and to create an impact, in the society as well, not just not just in a professional way, but also personal impact to the society, to the patients that I'm dealing with. The patients I got right in the first month itself, I knew I am not going for any other counselings. I am not going for any other branch. I am done. This is it. This is anything for me. And I knew it then. So this was in 2022, and that is when I joined.
Oh my God, I just got goosebumps. AIMS is known for its pressure. And how do you manage the pressure and stress and still show up fully to your patients?
Right. Seems being a really apex center, and especially for cancer, it is the apex center in the country. So we really have a lot of patients from across, all the states, really far. We have patients from Bihar, we have patients from Jammu and Kashmir, we have patients from everywhere. The pressure in terms of patients, honestly, I mean, I was initially it was overwhelming, of course, but right now I'm so used to it that if I do not have the number of patients, we are so much used to that now. And I think it's, I don't know, overworked and underpaid, this whole dictum of medical science in India. I mean, yes, it prevails, but I think we are all, so much embedded into it now that we are used to it, and without it, we really cannot survive. So that is the professional part of it. Personal part of it, Grace, I was blessed with some of the amazing seniors in AIMS, who would guide me, who would teach me things, literally hold my hand and teach me procedures. I was really weak at procedures to begin with. I mean, very simple ones. And From then to now, being able to do all sort of complicated nerve blocks, even in difficult anatomy patients, and all sort of nerve blocks and other tubes, any kind of procedures. So that 3 years of that, being guided by some of the best seniors and the best faculties and names, I think that is what really makes you realize how much quality really matters and how much impact you can make. So, going for skills and going for a good academic degree, that is how much it really matters. Doing it from an institution like this, of course, it changed my life, and it is continuing to change right now as well. But the kind of impact it, the kind of hands-on I got, and the kind of love and appreciation on small things, along with that, a proper critical appraisal on everything that I did wrong. So I think a perfect balance of that. I was really blessed, and I really hope all of my juniors who are about to join PG get this kind of seniors for training and everything, because really it is something that shapes you as a doctor, it shapes you as a human being, and it's it is basically going to culminate into your personal as well as professional life. These 3 years of life are so damn important, because this is going to change how you look at a patient. It is going to change how you look at other people, not patients, just normal people as well. It is going to change a lot of things. So picking up something that you really want to pursue, and giving it the right amount of time and energy, and doing the right things to reach there, I feel is really important. You should have a rough idea. I'm not saying you should have a lot of clarity about what you are about to pursue, but I think you should have a rough idea of what you want to be in your life, and then go from there. I think that really helps.
I think that internal compass, that why, is what keeps the best doctors going. Can you share a moment when communication changed everything? Maybe in an emergency.
Like I told you, we deal with cancer patients all the time, right? And communication and prognostication is one of the key things that is taught as a part of our curriculum itself, right? It's not just something that we do. It's also a part of the curriculum officially, communication skills. So I do remember, having a lot of pediatric patients in between on night duties in emergency. So I think communication with parents of a pediatric patient is probably one of the most difficult kind of communication skill that a doctor, especially in palliative medicine, needs to have. And everything, we could eventually really master that, connecting them to the right people, connecting them to the right NGOs. So these people in a government college, they're coming from not so well-off families as well, right? You want to help them financially, you want to help them in every way that you can. So there was this really, almost terminal kid in the pediatric oncology emergency, and we were looking at pain management and the supportive care of the kid. And the mother was really heartbroken. So at that point, I remember going there with a junior of mine, and two of us, we went there, we spoke to them, and we simply discussed, how many people are there in there, so they have other kids. And sometimes I think just having a conversation with your patients, with the patient's relatives, especially in cases of pediatrics, and it really makes a difference. And so we spoke to them, we connected them to an NGO. We have an NGO called Can Kids for children suffering. So I remember, speaking with her. But very particularly, I remember that, she was telling about her other kids who are suffering because the parents are just really invested in the one kid who is sick at this point. So realistic hope for the patients, for the caregivers is really important. And I really prognosticated them. I told them that, having a real, insight of what is going on is really important, first of all. And secondly, you need to take care of the other kids. So being very straightforward also sometimes helps. You have to tell them what they are looking at. You have to prepare them for the worst, and you have to make sure that they do not drain themselves mentally, physically, emotionally, financially. They cannot drain themselves, and for that, I think a doctor needs to communicate with their patients and everybody in a really real manner. So that is something I would like to share as a message as well, that it's really important to have realistic hopes and to share the realistic picture with your patient. That is something I learned from AIMS, and I think it is going to go really far.
That's so moving, and it shows how technical expertise is not enough. What's the hardest conversations you've ever had with a patient or its family?
So again, I think hardest conversation, we've had a lot of because AIMS is this apex referral center, right? So this is triaging basically, and it is just like any other government college at this point. You have to triage the patient. You have to select. You have to kind of make files. You have to register the patients and everything. So some of the patients, so for example, we have a 23-year-old, female suffering from breast cancer versus, a relatively older person who is, we have to triage patients. So at that point, the kind of conversations that we've had to had, with the families, that has been really challenging, especially in the beginning of my career when I was just in there, and I would have to, explain it to them that why I cannot take you and why you need to be another center, maybe have a realistic hope. Those kind of conversations have not really been ideal. Even today, I have not been able to master them. And I think it is a challenge for any doctor out there in government setup. Patients end up blaming doctors for it, and I think that is not ideal on so many levels, because things are not really in our hands in most of the times in such cases. So I think those sort of conversations have been really difficult. The other conversations have been about patients whose caregivers are their children. So now, you have to explain it to them. It becomes really difficult. And then I starkly remember there was this around mid-30s, a man in mid-30s. And then he had just gotten married, and the wife was, again, some similar age itself, and she was suffering from a terminal carcinoma gallbladder. And everybody who is working in oncology very well knows that carcinoma gallbladder is really something that oncologist is most scared of, because it leaves us with really, really less time. So having those sort of conversations with somebody who has recently gotten married, it has taken a toll, but it has also made us all, as in an oncology sector, really, really strong. And I think that is what training is for. I think, yeah.
And you carry that movement with you. How do you strike the balance between being clinically sharp and emotionally present?
Question, because somebody who is in this branch especially needs to be emotionally available and medically present at the same time, because we're dealing with cancer patients. So again, and especially in this one, because we are in cancer pain, we are doing supportive care for the patient, right? And a patient in pain usually has a lot of psychological component, right? So pain, even WHO defines pain as multiple other domains and not just physical pain. So there is spiritual pain, there is, all of these issues are there in those people. So how do we manage it emotionally? I'll give you an example. I nerve block to a patient. It's about 10 days back. So she was having, carcinoma gallbladder, and we were planning a celiac plexus block for this patient. A block. So the procedure, she was comfortable. We did the pre-procedure planning with consent and everything, and she was in the minor OT table. Now, we did the procedure. It is a not very lengthy procedure, probably takes half an hour or something in and out. So, we did the procedure, and usually we expect a fall of BP after the procedure, right? So, we checked the BP, and it had fallen, which means the block is successful, and the patient also had a starkly decreased numerical rating scale of pain after that. So, her pain was better. But all of a sudden, this woman, she starts crying. And I am confused. I am really, really confused that, okay, now the pain is better and the woman is crying. So, this is a stark example of, initially the patient was completely worried, stressed about the pain. And that was the only thing on her head, And the moment you gave her pain relief, and, the neurolytic blocks works within minutes, within seconds, in fact. It works immediately. So, the moment you gave a block, the patient starts crying. And now we have to discuss that because I am worried. Is it a complication? No, it isn't, right? So then I spoke to her, and then, she started talking about her family. She started talking about everything else except the pain. I mean, as a pain physician, I was pretty happy with the block, with the procedure. But at that point, giving emotional support to her became so important. And, she was worried about the disease. She was worried about her family. She was worried about everything on planet. So, this is how you've got to balance out medical and emotional aspect. That, medically you have to kind of be there, and then you have to also listen to the patient altogether. But I think one most important thing I want to tell to everybody who is a doctor and listening to this is never take these stories home. So I learned it the hard way, but initially I think all the doctors really face this, and we tend to take these stories home, and it kind of really affects. We've got to take care of ourselves as well, because only then we'll be able to take care of the patient. Right. So if you just keep workplace and home very, very separated out mentally, there should be a glass wall between them. Obviously, you should be available if there is an emergency and everything, but you should be doing your own things. If you're cooking or there's a hobby or anything, only all of this is going to make you emotionally intelligent. You should be doing some workout or anything that makes you happy. Please do not miss out on that, because in the long run, we have to do sustainable caregiving as a doctor. We can't just exhaust ourselves and burn ourselves out, because only then we'll be able to take the right medical decisions as well as be emotionally available for the patient. So I think that is what helps. For me, I try to hit the gym probably twice a week or something. More than that, it is not happening. I'm trying better. But yeah, I love cooking. I have my own hobbies, and I make YouTube videos to educate my patients and other people on cancer and pain management and everything. So, even while I am working, I'm not working when I make my videos on YouTube. So I think all of this combined kind of gives me the perfect balance to have the emotional availability for my patients. Yeah. One thing as a human being that AIIMS taught me, because it is a place with a lot of competitive environment. It is a place with a lot of patients. It is a very high adrenaline place in general. You are always on to something. There's always something going on. There's never a dull day in AIIMS. As a doctor, as a patient, there's just never a dull day. So, that is something that will always stay with me as a person, that, you've got to, despite the high adrenaline spikes in your life, you've got to maintain that baseline low. only then you're going to kind of balance out your life. If you are riding with the adrenaline and you are just in it and really overwhelmed by everything going on, you're going to crash very, very soon. So that adrenaline crash and how to deal with it, that is a life lesson for someone like me, because I was riding on adrenaline for a very long time in my MBBS and in my life in general. That AIIMS taught me humility, it taught me where I belong, it made me see really sick patients, it made me see suffering, it made me see a lot of things that made me a baseline. I don't ride on adrenaline anymore, and I think that is a personal takeaway that I am really grateful that AIIMS could give me that. And I think that's something I would also tell to other people. And I even now very randomly, sometimes tell people to just kind of hold on to it, give it a day. If you're having a bad day, if things are not kind of in your hand, if things are really going out of control, give it a day, because that's really what AIIMS taught me. Just hold on to it and watch it flow, and you will be just fine, right? I would tell myself to play more. I would tell myself to hold on to my friendships in school. I do have quite a few lovely friends from back school, and but a lot of them I lost touch because I had to completely isolate myself during NEET preparation. So I would probably tell myself to be kind and just kind of still hold on to the friendships, because I think it really lasts very, very long. Because I know I have a friend, she's really close to me, and she is my school friend, and I know how beautiful it is to just talk to her, just to tell her about my day, to tell her about my plans and everything. So I wish I could have more of that. So I sacrificed my personal life completely in both NEET UG and PG. So that is something I would tell my 17-year-old old self, that just be kind, play a little, you'll be just fine, you're still going to do well. There is no need to look in all directions, just look straight ahead, focus on your notes, focus on what you have read from one or two sources. Do not open 200 different sources on YouTube and there are 200 different platforms. Do not do that. Do not fall into that jargon in both UG and PG. I think the trick is very much the same. You've got to stick to a source and then just keep doing questions, repeatedly, and keep practicing on it, keep adding on it. But you cannot be, reading the same topic from scratch from 200 different places. That leads to a lot of time waste and confusions. Okay, stick to one source and believe in yourself as to your source and your preparation. You should know that your notes are going to be it. You don't need to look around and be worried about every person on earth. You just need one seat. You don't need 1 lakh seat. Even if 2 lakh, 3 lakh, 5 lakh, 10 lakh, whatever number of people are appearing for the exam, you just need one seat. Remember that. You don't need 10 lakh seats. So you don't have to be worried about how many people are appearing, what is the geopolitical scenario of the country, what is going on around. It's okay to hold on, sit down, put your head down and just read the notes and keep it very, very simple. Just read, attempt MCQs and you're done, right? This is a preparatory advice. Secondly, a personal advice would be to always have a rough idea of what you want to be in your life. Ask yourself, do you really want to be a doctor? Do you really want to go down this path? Because, it is a journey of 10 plus years at a minimum. This is minimum, right? If you add on more specialty and fellowships and etc., which is of course required these days, it can go up to 15 years of just minting. So this huge time duration sometimes becomes very, very taxing for a lot of people. So ask yourself if you are really in for it. I have seen a lot of people who do MBBS and then just give up. because MBBS, again, it's a long road. It has 4 professional examinations, it has an internship, and then you are a doctor, and then finally you want to do MD, MS, or whatever. So people kind of tend to give up in between. So, ask yourself, do you really have the resilience, and do you really want to pursue something that will make you into a full-fledged professional probably 10 to 15 years from now? And if you're up for it, only then go for it. Do not jump into something that you're not sure about. That is something, because we as kids in class 11th and 12th are not probably that mature enough to make such decisions. But try to still ask yourself, and do not be blinded by the people around you. People around you might be preparing for 200 different other things, and you might be like confused as to, okay, I might do this, I might do that, okay, this is a good option. Just first listen to your heart, and then go from there. Build on it. After your MBBS, you're supposed to build on it. Build on what you have learned in your MBBS. You're supposed to, have a rough idea. While you are doing MBBS, you're supposed to have a rough idea. Ki, okay, this subject seems interesting, this kind of patient, and then most importantly, what kind of impact you want to bring to your society. And third, and the most important, please do not do it for the money. Because if you're thinking that sin is going to kind of mint money, trust me, it is a myth, biggest myth, that you're going to be super rich after doing MBBS, because no such thing is going to happen. It is a very, very long journey, and you're supposed to be compassionate, supposed to be good at it, and learn your skills, focus on the skills. You should know your procedure, you should know your OPDs and IPDs and everything, and only then you come to the other side. If you are a fan of early money, because that is the kind of generation that is coming now. People want early money, early success, and this is a very real fact. Then please, it is a humble request, do not dive into this branch. Needs a lot of, it needs more patience. I mean, I know how patient my family has been with me over the years, because they would always say, so my brother is a software engineer, so, and he's younger to me, so, and he started earning before me, and it always happens, right? So if you're in it for the money, please do not be in it. This is a very real advice that people do not give you at front. People just say, okay, life is sorted, get into MBBS and you are done. Get into a government college and you are sorted. You will be rich, famous, intelligent, everything. But it is not a cakewalk. It is not a journey full of stars. It is not like that. So yeah, that's what I want to tell. There is a real picture to it. Of course, the profession is one of the most prestigious ones in the entire country. You will always be held with the kind of respect, and looking back at 10 years, I would never change my decision to be a doctor, no matter how much the struggle. But then if you're not really passionate for it, you cannot do well in it. That is the issue with it, right? So I think that is what I'd like to tell.